Hi, if you or your children are suffering because of your relationship with your ex-partner, because it's stressed or strained, or maybe they're just not a nice person, this show is for you. Welcome to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brooke Olson and Charlie Jewett. Enjoy another episode now. Hey everybody, welcome back to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brooke Olson and Charlie Jewett. This week, believe it or not, is episode 9. It's amazing. We're cooking along here, Brooke. And this week we have a really special guest, someone I've actually talked to in the past and Brooke knows really well, Dr. Michael Bone. Michael Bone, how you doing?
I'm just great, thank you.
Having a great day?
Yes, indeed. Avoiding the hurricane, luckily.
I know. I go to Hawaii and Florida, and all I do is chase hurricanes. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk today a bit about a conversation about parental alienation. This is near and dear to my heart. I had some experience with this in my own divorce and to some degree still, but I have two really close friends, and their alienation has gone to levels that are just shocking. I'm sure you've probably seen worse, but for me, they're just amazing. And Brooke, you've got a lot of experience in this area just with having talked to thousands of people and knowing, Dr. Michael Bone longer than I have. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Brooke, have you kind of lead this particular episode and sit a bit in the background, but this is really near and dear to my heart, and rest assured I'm going to be taking notes on my side and learning. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Bone.
Oh, certainly, my pleasure.
So what I want to do with this podcast this week is really cover some tracks so we can give the listeners some touchstones, some things to think about, both if they are in this or it's feeling like this, or to kind of hit it off at the pass and or turn the boat around. Okay. And Dr. Bone, you and I have had a couple of clients together. We've had some extensive conversations, and I am consistently amazed at the level of expertise you bring to this conversation and the solutions that you have in your pocket. So I'm going to try over the course of this time to pull some of that out of you and help deliver it to the people listening to this podcast.
Well, very good. I think being able to operationalize what we now understand about alienation is really the point, to be able to intervene sooner rather than later to turn the thing around. And there really are some absolute do's and don'ts that can be helpful with that. So I agree with hitting on some of those specific points.
So personally, I've always had some ideas about alienation and how it kind of gets started, but I've kind of winged it. And part of what I would like to do in this conversation too is help dial it in for me as well here. So let me kick this off a bit here. And I want to kind of talk a little bit about the causes of alienation, because from my standpoint, this stuff starts long before a couple is separated. There's a dynamic within the family that is already a setup for this. So when they get the divorce and they separate, this is already started. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And there's general consensus now amongst in the professional community that severe alienation is a little bit different than the mild and the moderate for the following reasons. We have good evidence to suggest that parents that engage in severe alienation, that where children, go to extremes and falsely accuse outrageously and don't process reality like everyone else around them does, there's a high incidence of certain personality disorders that we see over and over. And we see there are 3 that we see. That's antisocial, which used to be called sociopathic, and borderline and narcissistic. And one of the things that all 3 of these share is the inability to step outside of oneself and critique one's own behavior. I mean, that experience of, oh man, I should have said this and not that, and why did I do that? And that sort of normal, healthy, self-reflective things. These parents that are engaged in more severe alienation, I'm sure we'll develop that as we go, really tend to have that. And so therefore their ability to critique their own behavior and see they're contributing to what's going on, they really don't see that. There's a big blind spot there. So I think that's an important thing. And that also explains a lot about how it gets started in terms of, as you say, pre-separation, because these people also are not very good at negotiating differences in relationships, different points of view. They don't tolerate it very well. And so whenever there's a difference of opinion, they experience it often as an attack. So, yeah.
So there's a really large dualistic form of thinking with these people. It's all black and white. It's me versus you. There's a lack of self-reflection. But also, one of the things that I think I found in this piece as well, and this speaks to part of the brain development that we've talked to a little bit in earlier podcasts, is the brain development that happens in these people with these personality disorders, and their lack of ability to not just self-reflect, but to self-regulate.
Yes. I mean, if you don't see something, you can't go, oh, I need to change that.
Right.
So the ability to not be able to see is also really is in tandem with an inability to change. I mean, I've had parents that would fall into this category look at videos that show them, if you filled a room, and I've seen a courtroom filled, and there's a video that shows them doing one thing, and everybody sees what's going on, but while the person who is in the video, the alienating parent in the video, will actually, so see what I mean? You see what he did, and nobody else is seeing the same thing at all. I mean, there's a different processing of reality that is not shared by people that don't have these problems. So,
and that brings in the conversation, Dr. Bone, doesn't it, about this propensity for people to create this bizarro world of trying to actually get in and manage this, because there's nothing in the conversation that's congruent with reality or the norm of reality, right?
It gets that way. Yes, indeed. It doesn't start that way, but once these conflicts start, again, if I can't see what I'm doing to contribute to a problem, it's always somebody else's fault. And I believe that in my heart of hearts.
Right.
And that makes me very persuasive, especially think about it as a parent who believes that they've been wronged when they've really not been wronged at all. But they deeply believe that, and they are very persuasive about that, and think about the effect that has on their children. So it's quite a slippery slope, no question about it.
And when I'm working with the clients and the parents in my class, and Charlie knows this, to me, victim statements are a really big red flag of this. And we've got two kinds of victims that start to show up. We've got a narcissistic victim piece that looks a lot like borderline, and then we've got the borderline victim that comes in to the conversation as well, right? And they look, and they feel very much the same. So what I try to create is this idea of, let's stop. Part of what helps me see this in my clients or in the other side of this is if my client has the ability to step out of victim and start to take responsibility and move in that direction. And that tells me that I'm looking at somebody who's got enough health that I can start to work with them, right?
Absolutely. I mean, think about what happens when people get divorced. I mean, they're getting divorced because they're having trouble getting along. So it's very common for parents under those circumstances to act badly and do things that could be interpreted as alienating behavior. But when those parents who don't have those blind spots, when it's brought to their attention, they say, look, man, you can't do that. You can't talk about the mother like that in front of the kids. You're doing harm to the kids. A normal reaction would be, oh, God, I didn't realize that. I won't do that anymore. But people with these particular disorders, when they're given that feedback, they go, what are you talking about? I didn't say that, even though they just said that. So it's very otherworldly in a way. But that's kind of a good test, if you will. And, when parents are going through divorce, if they can hear feedback about to do and not to do, and they abide by it, that's a good sign. That's a good prognostic sign for sure.
Right. So I'm going to jump around my outline here a little bit and just bring in, because you just said something that I think is really important. And when people are going through this, what I'm trying to do with working with people like you, Dr. Bone, and Dr. Miller, and these people that really have a a handle on this, is to put together a group of people that have got the information that really drives this home. And I just read a paper that Dr. Miller just put out on, I forget what the name of it was exactly. Counterintuitive.
Yes.
Professionals, this counterintuitive piece of where professionals really miss the mark on this one because they have so little clinical experience. And for people like you and I that work in this all of the time, that counterintuitive look at what's going on is actually becoming intuitive to us, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's the irony of the whole thing. I mean, what Steve Miller is talking about in and I think it's a terrific point. I think it's a great way to explain how many otherwise competent evaluators can miss this, because the intuitive reaction when you have, let's assume we have a family with a alienating parent and say 2 kids, and then the targeted or unfavored parent. On the surface, it looks like these 2 kids are so bonded to the loving parent, and they're all gathered and circle the wagons against the other parent. Intuitively, it looks like, boy, that this parent and child or children, they have a close relationship, and then there's the targeted or unfavored parent over there. It's the assumption is, well, he or she, whichever it was, mother or father, must have done something to cause this. That's the initial response across the board, that when this kind of scenario is presented. That's the intuitive. That's how our brain processes this stuff immediately. So the first step is we have to show that in fact it's not a healthy relationship. It's a very unhealthy, enmeshed relationship where the child really becomes an extension of that parent in a very unhealthy way, where developing independence and individuation is really penalized by that parent, although unwittingly, unconsciously.
And when I'm looking at this, and you and I have had this conversation a little bit before, and I'm going to bring in something a little provocative from this standpoint. But when I'm looking at this, and I'm getting this more of the borderline sense of what's going on here, if you will.
Right. Yep.
And I start to look at this enmeshment piece. What really comes to my mind in this is something that is attuned to emotional incest, right?
Yes. Yes.
There's this piece where this adult is getting their emotional needs met.
Yes.
From the child, and the child is becoming to some degree adultified in that conversation. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it can go either way. I mean, the nature of an enmeshed or unhealthy or boundaryless kind of relationship is the boundaries are blurred. And the child can either be parentified or infantilized. And you can sort of go both ways. I mean, children can act far younger than they really are, and seem to require intervention, protection that's inappropriate for their age. Or the other one, and I think more common, is the child is parentified and given responsibility to sort of take care of that parent emotionally, but it's all set up by the parent. The child is simply responding to that in a way to avoid the wrath of that parent, really, is what it boils down to. But I think that's it is an emotional kind of incest. We see things. I was talking to someone on the phone earlier today that, the mother and the child lay in bed and watch. I mean, it's a ritual. They watch TV. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't mean to suggest there is, but it becomes something that is over the top. It becomes extreme, and it becomes something the child sort of feels like they can't survive without. I mean, it's the good parenting produces independent children that rely on themselves and that sort of go out and explore the world with a sense of confidence and learning. That's the idea of good, healthy parenting. This is the opposite of that.
Brooke, do you mind if I jump in for a second?
Sure, Charlie.
The laying in bed watching in TV, I could see how people would make an argument for that. What about having a kid sleep in your bed until they're 11, an opposite gender kid sleep in your bed until they're 11, and then the big change that comes when confronted about it is, okay, now they're 12 and they stay in their own bed but still in your bedroom.
Yeah, I mean those are actual examples. You sound like you're thinking about something specifically, but I've heard those exact things many times. So those are expressions of that kind of unhealthy. Everybody that has kids, when your kid is little and you're putting them to bed, and they don't want to go stay in their room. They don't want to stay. And so
Yeah,
we as parents, you sort of lay down on the floor or on the bed. You might fall asleep, but it's just
yeah.
a gradual thing, ultimately, to get them to learn to go to sleep in their own room. That's normal, healthy, and it will be over the protest of small children. But when that goes on and is encouraged by a parent who really needs that child to be there with them for their emotional reasons, that's when you have this process going
Mm,
on. So I think there really is a emotional incest that is part of this.
yeah.
So I want to circle back a little bit to where we started here,
Okay.
Dr. Bone, and I want to talk a little bit about the beginnings of this, because
Okay.
I have the opportunity and the privilege sometimes to perhaps get my clients ahead of the curve here, because
Yeah.
I do have sight. I can sniff some of this stuff out,
Yeah.
and my sense is if I can get them moving in a particular direction, and I think this particular conversation is going to help them, is that they got here because on some level they were not in a healthy relationship with their children to begin with, and their boundaries were really blurred with their with the other parent. So they didn't they allowed that person to kind of take control and manipulate and suck these children in, and they didn't have a really good, strong, healthy relationship of their own with the children to start with. Would you agree with that statement?
I think that's very often the case. It's because the relationship with the parent who ultimately will be doing the alienating is they've the parent on the receiving end of that is often overly accommodating, or just to basically stay out of the wrath
Right.
of the other parent. I mean, parents that do this stuff do not tolerate. This is, I think, very important. They don't tolerate other opinions very well. You
No.
can't agree to disagree. But I mean, agreeing to disagree is a very healthy kind of negotiating response in a relationship. But these folks really see another opinion as not only different, wrong, but also very often as an attack. So they
Right.
will respond accordingly. And then, if you're married to someone like that, and every time you voice another opinion, after a while you say, oh, it's not worth it. I'm not going to bring it up. So you, little by little, you give up little pieces of the kingdom, on a gradual basis. Yeah, I think that's very much the case.
I can relate to that. Yeah. Yeah.
So my approach to this a little bit, when I get clients in, is to say, listen, you're not living with them anymore,
Yeah,
and you have an opportunity to start to build your relationship differently, whether it was abusive, a mesh, whatever that piece was.
right.
And for you as the parent now to take on a totally different role of engaging with your children using really good parenting techniques,
Yep,
staying engaged with them, positive anticipation, all of these
yep,
things to build that relationship. So when the children, because children are really smart most of the time,
yeah,
and they
yeah,
can see incongruencies.
yes,
But if a parent isn't willing to make that full separation, to engage in it differently, then those that look back and to the incongruent conversation doesn't exist. So what I'm trying to do in this with parents in the early stages is to really have them make a statement of no, and in an organic way. We've got a really great relationship here, and we have boundaries, and we do things together, and there's consequences to what happens, but they're really good natural consequences and logical consequences that help build a good, secure bond with that parent. And I
yes.
see that as the prophylactic to the alienation piece if we can get there early enough.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, that's one of the things that happens if you're in a relationship and a divorce is happening and a separation is happening, and again, the parent who's doing the alienating they tend to be really control freaks. I think everyone would agree with that, my way or the highway. So to accommodate that, people will often sort of step back and allow that parent to sort of take over. So as a consequence, they put themselves in a more secondary position with their kids without even realizing it. And so then when when the separation happens or the divorce happens, and there's no other parent around to buffer them, they have a choice. I mean, they can fill in that space, and I think that's what you're talking about is filling in that space that with the children that they didn't really do before. And so I think that's a great
Exactly.
opportunity. And it really is a prophylactic against the alienation. It truly is.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in a couple of cases where I've given this and they haven't done it, and it's gone down the way that I predicted, and
Yeah.
the people come back and go, "Damn it, I wish I'd have
Right.
listened to this." But there's a, we're back to the counterintuitive thing, because
Yeah.
in order to do that with somebody that has one of these personality disorders, we have to get really good at setting boundaries and
Yes.
holding them. And that's usually been the Achilles heel to the relationship in the beginning, because if they had
Yes.
done that, they wouldn't have been with them in the first place, right?
Right. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Yeah. I mean, we live and we learn, but I think those are the things that's the muscle that needs to get exercised that had atrophied in the relationship. The one to sort of assert and be, have boundaries and exercise consequences and produce a safe environment for
Right.
children. So I think that's very much the case. Very much the case.
Hey, Brooke.
So
Oh, go
yeah.
ahead, Dr. Vaughn.
One more thing I was going to say is that parents in this situation where they're going through a separation divorce and this dynamic of alienation is going on are often, I hear this all the time, are faced with the dilemma. Look, my my ex doesn't want me to show up at the soccer game, and if I do show up at the soccer game, it's really going to be hard on the kid. The kid's going to feel them, and that's all true. However, the choice not to show up at the soccer game, not to assert oneself and assert one's being a parent of that child, really delivers another slow grow message that really does tend to peripheralize that parent in that kid's eyes. So I'm always encouraged, you really got to make yourself uncomfortable. And maybe that will make your child uncomfortable, but the bigger message is I'm here because I'm legitimately here and I love you and I'm, the other parent.
Right. So one of the ways that I've kind of tried to maneuver that, and tell me if this is something that makes sense to you or not, but what I'll tell a parent to do in that arena is to show up at the game but not have any interaction with the other parent, or maybe even the child in that moment, because we're keeping the child out, but I was there, they saw that I was there, and then the next time I see them, I maybe have a film about it, or I pull out specific instances that talk about their play or what happened at the game, or the things
Mm-hmm.
that let them know that I was absolutely there, but I didn't get into the mix and make the child comfortable. And that seems
Yes.
to be an answer.
No, I think that's a good idea. Again, the child will be very aware if you're there or not. Believe me.
Right.
I mean, they're very tuned into that. So I think being there is the most important thing. Having to connect and say hi, how you doing, and that's if that can happen, that's always good. But is that necessary? No. I think it's more important to be there, and because that flies in the face of what children are told. When I was doing evaluations, if I was doing an evaluation where alienation was present and I'm interviewing the child, if you ask the right questions, you always get the same answer to this question, and that is, do you believe that the unfavored or targeted parent loves you? And I can think of no exception where that child comes to believe, is taught, or somehow comes to believe that targeted or unfavored parent either doesn't love them or is incapable of it or is something that gets in the way. And think about the damaging message that is for a child that one of the parents doesn't love them. So when we show up at the game and make ourselves uncomfortable, it flies in the face of that, doesn't it? So
Right.
I think I was talking to someone earlier today. I said, put that insight in your back pocket. And if you're faced with what to do about a given situation, pull it out and look at it, look through the lens of that and say, what message am I sending about my loving or not loving my child? And that really can be a very helpful tool to help navigate these difficult waters.
Let me say something about that, Brooke and Dr. Bowen, because it sounds like, Brooke has given me so much, I find so much hope and encouragement in talking with Brooke, because there's such a positive, like, being on the other side of an alienation, and the people that I know who are, there's a very helplessness, or the sense of helplessness,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And when I listen to you guys talk, it sounds more like gravity doesn't get upset with people say that there's a pull to fly off the earth. You know what I mean? Something that goes
Right.
totally opposite of what gravity just does its job and whatever. You know what I mean? If there's people out there. So it's like there's so much helplessness because we're like, how do we get them to stop saying that? How do we get it to stop affecting the kids? How do we counter it? Right? And this is a person that, like, as you've mentioned, can't even see their own wrong, right?
Right.
So even court orders aren't going to stop them. Really, why we believe in gravity is because it's so consistent. It just always pulls us towards the earth and we don't fly away. That's what we're talking about here. It like show up to every game, live up to all your promises, show up for your parenting time. Don't make them uncomfortable, right? Don't put them in the middle. Just be rock solid, loving.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean it's going to work. Like, that's not the way we do things. We do things because they're right or because they have a great chance of success or whatever. It's not because there's some sort of guaranteed. But other than the other option, like fighting it and bad mouthing it and like, what did he say about me? Rah! Right? Well, that's not going to work.
Right. All that does is feed the alienation and put the child more in the middle. I think that's a very good point. I mean, I always tell people, in a case of classical parental alienation, the targeted or unfavored parent can't really make it go away, but you can sure make it worse. I mean, if you react badly, you can sure make it worse, and that's we don't want to do that. We want to hold it off, and eventually, what I have found is with the passage of time, the greatest likelihood is that if one is consistent and does maintain contact, that the child may act in alienated ways when in the view of the alienating parent, but not so much when they're not. I mean, I've just got off the phone with someone in Los Angeles, as a matter of fact, who talked about when there's nobody looking, he has a wonderful relationship with his 12-year-old daughter,
right.
But as soon as somebody is, it all sort of changes. But those periods where it reigns rock solid is that gravity. It absolutely is. So it's important to protect that.
And this is the exact thing that happened with this one case that you and I are involved in right now. That because that parents just stayed the course and kept showing up and doing what they were doing, and was able to keep from stepping on their own toes through their anxiety. The other stuff was able to show through. And she's getting some motion with her children on this, and it was simply from what you were talking about as well.
I think an important insight. I mean, if we're coming up with takeaways, and I think that's what we're trying to do. I mean, one important insight is to, even in spite of how horribly an severely alienated child can act, they can be very mean-spirited, provocative, say terrible things that are unimaginable, really, in a normal situation. But even when it reaches that point, deep down inside, these kids do not want to be this way. Right. They want to maintain a relationship. They miss not having that relationship. They may not be in touch with that, but under the right circumstances, that truth comes out. I mean, that's good. It's part of the gravity.
Right.
The gravity again. Yeah.
Anxiety is one of the biggest drivers for the alienated person in all of this, and I think the causation of that is a lot of the alienation behavior that's going on, and that they're going to lose their children, but it's also a lot of the causation of the problems that they create. So if we can get them sitting down, I would like to refer to it in kind of a Zen position of, well, this is in front of us now, but we don't know how it's going to unfold. Let's watch it unfold.
Right. Exactly.
It has a much better opportunity for a better outcome.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great perspective, is to sort of watch it unfold and watch yourself squirm if you like, but just let it be what it is, and but most importantly, to be there.
The term that I like to use in that is to get comfortable with your own discomfort.
Yes, right, exactly. And I think that perspective of being on the screen and then watching it from the theater seat is very useful.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about gaslighting.
Okay.
this is one of the great narcissistic tools, isn't it? And
Yes.
it's one of the
Oh, yes.
most chaos making, anxiety creating pieces that anybody can do. And there's gaslighting that is simple about trying to tell you a reality is something that it's not. I didn't do that. I didn't see that. I didn't go there. And some of that's conscious, and some of it's inherent in their lack of being able to see themselves in it. But part of it is it's a manipulation.
Absolutely.
And then there's this other type of gaslighting, which is really a cat and mouse game of, well, I'm here, come get them here. No, I didn't say that. I'm over here. And this place of really spinning it up and then using that, or seemingly using that in a way to project that this parent just really doesn't care about showing up for the kids and what have you.
Exactly. And prevent the contact, and then say, well, I'm sorry your mom or your dad, whichever it was, didn't call you back, or
Mhm.
didn't come to the game when in fact you were told the game was somewhere else or at a different time. I mean, that kind of thing is because children, again, are taught that that parent doesn't love them or has abandoned them or is incapable of it. So all those manipulations, all those maneuvers that tend to sort of throw mud on the unfavored parent, all really combine to deliver that message. Oh, they just don't care, I guess. So any absence that one may say, okay, I'm not going to show up to that event because my 10-year-old was pleading with me not to, so that it wouldn't be uncomfortable. Whenever I do that, that's the other side of that same coin is, but it feeds the abandonment, the unloving wound that's there, and worsens it. So
So
yeah.
yeah, and it's so insidious, isn't it? I mean, it's
Oh
like
boy, yeah.
so one of the things that I've come up with, and I'm wondering if you've got something else to add here, but I'm going to kind of prime the pump on this a
Sure.
little bit. I really like using tools like our Family Wizard,
Yeah.
but I like using it in a way that is really telling of this type of behavior as it starts to show up. And one of the first things that I notice about people that are trying to alienate or that are in these high conflict situations is they don't want to have the spotlight on them. They don't want anything that can show or track anything that they're doing. But there's an
Absolutely.
Achilles heel to that, and that is also that they have to have contact. They have
Yes.
to have a way in to do this manipulation.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've started to do over the years is to instruct my clients to go to our Family Wizard, and they'll say, well, I don't have a court order. They won't, the other party won't do this. And I say, well, let's just wait and see for a moment. And I have them buy both ends of the program and
Okay.
basically say, this is my email. This is the only way that I'm going to communicate with you. And hold a boundary there. And what the
Yes.
other party will start to do is phone calls, text messages, everything but that,
Yes.
using other emails. And what I tell them to do is just sit. They'll wait.
Yes.
They'll come around. And at
Yes.
some point, I had somebody do this about 2 weeks ago, and it took 40 plus attempts at them trying to get to them before they actually went into our Family Wizard and then started to use it.
Yeah, that's a great. I've never thought of that. That's a great idea, though. I like that. I mean,
And-
I can see that, and if really sticking to that one medium and not the others, you're right. They do need to get in there and get their shots in, so to speak. So,
right.
yeah, I think that's a great idea.
And one of the things that I've done with that as well is then once I've got them in, everything goes up on a calendar.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if somebody starts to try to gaslight and pull some of these other manipulations, it becomes very difficult.
yes, exactly. Well, it's about accountability. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the whole a big, strategy of an alienating parent is to draw attention to the targeted or unfavored parent and
Right.
keep the attention off of themselves.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the big in litigation. That's one of the big problems is dealing with that because the court is, properly biased toward the protection of children. So any allegation that suggests they may not be safe, the court's going to initially buy that every time. And then then it's up to the parent to show that not to be the case, but also to show what is the case is this gaslighting, this false accusations, this environment of false vilification that goes on and on and on to the world and to the children.
So I'm doing some of this right.
Oh, I think you're doing a lot of it right. I haven't thought about that, about buying both ends. That's a great idea. I think that's terrific.
I did that.
It does.
That's what I did.
Did you? I didn't know that. But I think it really creates a trap in a way. I don't mean that
Exactly.
trap's maybe not the best word, but
No, I
it
think
kind
it's
of
a
is the best
perfect word.
word.
I think it's a perfect
Yeah.
word.
Yeah. Because they do have to check in, don't they? They really
They
do.
can't help
in some way.
themselves.
Yeah,
It's
they
like
really cannot.
they just can't help themselves. And I've seen this so much. It's one of the things that's never failed. It's never one time failed.
Yeah, that's a great insight. I think that's very, very important. They really cannot help themselves. One of the things that happens when parents engage in this behavior, and again, the more severe end of the spectrum, the personality disordered parent, is that they really have a very, very overly developed perception of rejection. Even if they ended the relationship, in their
Exactly.
mind, they're going to feel like they made me do it. I had to end the relationship because of what they did to me, the other parent did to me. So they have this strong, as a psychoanalyst would say, this narcissistic injury that just never gets healed. And so they become obsessed. And they do this. This is a full-time job. And
Mhm.
an obsessed alienator really is a full-time job dealing with them. So
Right.
they really, if you put them in a place where the only way they can interact is our family wisdom, that's a great. I'm definitely going to suggest that. That's a great idea.
So there's a term that I learned along the way, and I don't know where it came from. I don't think I created it. I don't want to take, well, I do want to take
Well,
ownership
just
of
go
it,
ahead.
but I won't. But I'm sure you've heard it, a term called negative intimacy.
Oh, well, I haven't actually heard it, but I think I understand it. But tell me what. I mean,
So
that's an interesting. Yeah, go ahead. Tell me more about it.
this negative intimacy is this place where this person that has got this abandonment piece, right,
Yes.
is in the conflict to
Oh,
stay
yeah.
in
Okay.
relationship,
Yes.
which is what
I
you were
see.
just talking about.
Exactly. Another a more a sort of conventional psychological way of talking about would be a hostile dependency,
Okay.
staying connected vis-a-vis the conflict. And I
Right.
think these people really do get addicted to conflict, and so this is a happy environment for them because
Hmm.
they generate it and then they respond to it and then do it again and do it again and do it again. But
They just feed
there
on it.
are, oh yeah, absolutely, and it just is it's exhausting, but they don't seem to get exhausted because it's a fuel to them.
Well, this is the place, and we talked about this in one of our earlier podcasts of my rules for my class for everybody that comes through the class. And I may have mentioned them to you before, but it's kind of 3+1. It used to be 3, and now it's 3+1. And the first 3 are disengage, 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 and that starves the beast. That starves the
Yeah,
beast.
yeah,
And those aren't just consecutive, they're different levels to them, and I won't go into it here. But the fourth rule is, and this is talking about the pleasure of it, or the addiction to it, if you will, is when they feel triggered, is not, don't just do something, sit there.
okay. Well,
It's kind
say
of
more
a,
about that. Yeah,
so what I'm asking the people to do is to come into a place where they can regulate and get out of, the hippocampus and the reactivity, and back up into
yeah,
their frontal lobe and into problem solving. So
yeah.
we're pushing them, we're giving the nervous system an opportunity to head toward the
Right.
parasympathetic and to settle down and to re-engage in a different way.
Yes, yeah. I see. No, I think that's a step back and let
Mhm.
everything settle and then re-engage
Right.
after. Yeah, no, I think
Or, or,
that's
or
very
don't
good
engage
advice.
at all.
Or don't engage at all. I mean, that may be the engagement is not to choose not to, you
Exactly.
know, so to speak. Yeah.
Right.
Talk about the one of the things that's not exactly on point, but it's related. Sometimes I get a lot of questions about how to deal with alienated children who act horribly. And with that targeted parent, what do you do about that? And one of the things that the advice I give in situations like that is that the child, if the child, uh, the short version is you basically, with alienated behavior, you have to identify it first and
Mhm.
say, oh, that's what that is right there. And it's pretty easy to identify. And then basically put it on ignore. Because what happens if you defend or you, no, I didn't this or that, and you and do anything else, it basically feeds the flame.
It's an
And
engagement.
then it's exactly engagement, and it actually feeds the alienation. And what I tell people, you have to cut off the fuel supply.
Yep.
You have to basically not respond to that behavior, change the subject, and go on to something else. And it's if one can do that consistently, it really does have a pretty marked impact on that child's behavior when they're with the parent. I realize that's not exactly what we were talking about, but it came to mind when you were talking about you know, disengaging. That's
No,
another way to look at it.
I think it's actually on point, Dr. Bone, because part of what we're talking about is breaking a generational cycle of
Yeah.
conflict.
Yes.
And what we're teaching the children to do in that moment, just by modeling, is disengagement of not entering into a fight, right?
Yeah. And that's a great word, modeling. I think that, you know, children imitate what they see.
Hmm.
And with an alienating parent, they're out of control and constantly engaging, constantly engaging in conflict with various sources, not just the other parent, but other parts of the world too. I'm quite sure. But to have, on the other hand, a parent who doesn't engage, who remains even and balanced and is able to pick and choose what to respond to, that's a safe place for a kid to see. And the kid, and it's important to model that behavior so they can see what that's like, because they're not getting that at all in the other households.
And isn't that what secure attachment comes
Yes,
from?
exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly where it comes from.
And if
So I
somebody's
think
in that, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, no, I was just going to say, I was just going to sort of elaborate on that, that the insecure attachment is what happens in the other household because it's very conditional. It's based on my way or the highway. If you're not acting the way I think you should, then I'm going to reject you or accuse you or of a betrayal or something or other. So it's a very unsafe place. And the juxtaposition of those two experiences of the child is still seeing the, you know, the what would we might call the targeted or unfavored parent. It feels different, doesn't it? It feels very different and very calm in that household,
Right.
whereas it feels on the edge of one seat and very conditional and very unsafe in the other household.
And wouldn't you agree that children have a tendency, by and large, to navigate toward health?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And just to add on that, and this is a piece that is so important to me when I'm having this conversation, is that insecure attachment, you know, either that avoidant or that anxious attachment style, are the pathways to personality disorder. They're the continuum that lead to either the borderline or the narcissistic behavior if there isn't something that gets in the way of that narcissistic or borderline parent that is recreating that for this child in their life.
Exactly. I mean, being a parentally alienated child, that environment is a petri dish for growing personality disorders.
Hmm.
I don't know of any study that shows that, but I'm convinced that's what happens.
Me
That's
too.
why it's another reason it's important to stay connected, even if it's in a more attenuated way, because the child needs that that balance to realize the difference. Otherwise, they really get lost, and they too can develop those personality disorders. Because if you talk to an adult who clearly has one of those personality disorders, and you ask about their family of origin and the experiences therein, you're going to find out that they came by this honestly.
I often also find that when I'm working with a parent that is on the other side of this,
Yes.
that if they're the alienated parent or the disfavored parent, they came out of this as well, and they just had a different response to it.
Yeah, just like people that are children that are abused, there's sometimes the myth that, oh, that means they're going to grow up being an abusive parent. Well, they could, but they also could develop the opposite of that and say
Right.
that I'm going to be just the opposite of that, and if anything, bend over too far the other way.
Right.
So, we have choices, and I think that's a great example of that.
Brooke, people are listening. So our listeners, I know people know right away whether or not they're in a kind of a tough divorce or their ex is being a booger. But how does somebody know if they're being alienated? How do you know if you're the alienated parent or if there's some parental alienation going on?
Well, I want to throw something here, and then I want to hear Dr. Bones' response to it. But in my mind, that if there is a high conflict situation going in and people are arguing over the children, there is a form of alienation taking place already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's the basis, that's the start, and everything builds from there. So if we identify this as a high conflict situation, that's where we can stop in where we started earlier in the conversation, to really come in as a parent, really start to shift gears, to take responsibility to change that.
So if somebody's not easily giving up 50-50, you get them half the time, I get them half the time, or have they already begun to think in sort of an alienating way, like they should not be with you as much? Is that already the early warning signs?
That's what my sense is.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I think that's, again, when we go back, if you look at the statutory language, and I believe every state in the country has language that basically says one parent should support the relationship with the child and the other parent. I mean, that's an important principle to also keep in mind, because the alienation is the opposite of that. It's the sabotaging of that relationship. And what really is called for is the support. Divorced parents should be the other parent's apologist. Like in a non-alienated divorced kind of situation, the kid comes over to dad's and says, "Well, mom didn't want to do this and that." The proper response, well, your mom loves you. I'm sure she had a good reason for that. We can talk about it, but not to basically be that other parent's almost apologist, and to not allow that divided loyalty to work its way in. But this is the opposite of that. This is if a child expresses any hesitation or any even slightly negative thing, the alienating parent, he did what? What happened there? And then what? And then who was there? And then a barrage of questions that basically convey to the child, oh, this is not good, and I'm not supposed to think it was good. And so it really amplifies all the negatives. It's the opposite of what's supposed to happen, which is to support the relationship between the child and the other parent.
And let me save people a ton of headache. Yes, it's written into the laws, right? But it's not as easy as, hey, judge, they're breaking a law, right?
No, not at all.
I mean, it is just not something that courts seem to want to look at or talk about. I mean, and you do mention it, and they're like, all right, get a psychological evaluation. You pay $15,000. It's like, it's all bad news, if you go after this thing.
Well, the only other thing I would say, the family court system is really has a hard time with this particular problem. Well, one of the things I've sort of found is that these cases really have to be presented in a particular way to the court, and if they're not, the court will almost always get it wrong. So even though you can demonstrate that parent's not doing this, not doing what they're supposed to, like you say, the court's not going to react very strongly to that. I mean, there's no bloodshed, there's no police reports, or not many anyway, and everybody's doing okay in school, so I guess it's okay, unless they're really it's exposed what's going on and how damaging it is for the child.
So we've taken a lot of your time today, and I just want to hit one more piece, if you're willing to, Dr. Bone.
Sure.
So there's this place where we've got to kind of get our head around what's real and what's not real, because we are really living in a bizarro world here. And for you and I, we see things in a particular way. But there are places, and I've got several cases right now where I'm in this, and I'm kind of dancing where I think I know where I've got it nailed, and I think I do. But there are parents out there that have heavy impairment, that, they've got diagnoses of bipolar and mood disorders and these other things where, when they're in their game, they're pretty good. And when they're off their game, they're in their narcissism or whatever else is going on for them. And there's usually complexes of that.
Yes.
So when we start to see a parent that, we can look at behaviorally, and you and I can see it better than
Hmm.
most, but that they are a detriment to the children, that they do make bad choices, that they don't have the capacity to do the right thing for the children and to take care of them in a responsible way. And the courts can't quite see that.
Right.
This is kind of the antithesis of the conversation that we've been having all along. Where do we go from here?
That's a great question. I think by pointing out the things that they're doing, and we're not talking about alienation here, I don't think, are we?
No, I don't believe so at all. I think
Yeah.
we're talking
Yeah.
about taking care of the children, but that's almost always the standpoint that the alienator is taking, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So it's, I mean, you have to sort of isolate and look at that behavior of that parent and determine if it's problematic or not, and then be able to point that out. And if the parent who's engaged in this, who's sort of off their game that day, if they're able to absorb that and self-correct, that's certainly the best kind of solution. But if they're really not able to do that, then some sort of intervention that protects the children. I mean, it depends on the specifics, of course, but uh, but I mean, it's a difficult problem. There's no question about that.
Yeah. And given the court's inability to see both ends of this, and I think it's true. I think, they make mistakes in both directions here.
Yes. Oh, yeah, for
Um,
sure.
my contention is, and I wonder if you agree with me, is that the same strategies are what we use here in terms of just being a good parent, laying it down, taking care of business, and letting the other person expose their bad behavior and
I think
trusting
so.
that the kids are going to be okay at the end of the day.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think good parenting is good parenting, and that if we sort of stick to that principle, I mean, the stuff that an alienating parent does is certainly very poor parenting. I mean, sometimes an evaluator would say, well, they're they're a good parent, but they got to do this alienation thing. Well, if they're doing this alienation thing, they're not acting as a good parent, I would say.
Exactly.
But very often, an evaluator would say, well, they're well fed and they get them to school on time and they know that the child. But if they're doing this alienation stuff, that really trumps everything else they're doing, I think, and that's sometimes not very well understood. So I think we have some more work to do to expose that as well.
Well, thank you for taking time away from the
Certainly.
hurricane to
Yeah.
come and have a conversation with us, Michael. I thought it was interesting that we're having a conversation with Dr. Michael Bone just as Hurricane Michael is hitting
Yeah.
Florida.
Exactly.
I was
I
going to
think I
say,
may have told you this. I was supposed to go visit a family member in Pensacola, which is very near where this is. We're supposed to leave there today, leave driving there today. So obviously that didn't happen. So that opened some time for me. So I'm glad they did.
Awesome. Charlie, do you want to throw anything out here as we end?
yeah, I was just going to say, maybe we should just refer to our alienating exes as Hurricane X.
Yeah.
Everybody don't understand what's going on here.
Yeah, right. That's a pretty good model, I think.
This is pretty good. Stir some things up. Oh man,
Yeah.
it's so helpful, so helpful. I'm sure there's so many people. We're getting more and more listeners every day, so really appreciate
Great.
you chiming
Fantastic.
in and
Yeah.
giving your expertise. We'll be back next week on Friday with another episode. Brooke, we're pretty safe to wrap this one up, aren't we?
Yep, we got it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Bone. Thank you, Brooke. Well, we'll come back next week with another episode of the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. And hopefully this is helping everybody tremendously, at least to know you're not alone. There's other people out there, and there are things that you can do. Listen to every show. It should help you out tremendously. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye. Brooke, people don't have to wait until Friday mornings to get more content. If this is something that's helpful for them, right? This isn't the first time you've broadcast anything or record anything or put anything out there in the world. What are the other ways people can get the help more aggressively or speed up their recovery process? What materials are available for people right now?
Well, I've written a book called The Black Hole of High Conflict, and it's available on Amazon and Kindle.
Great.
And everything that we're talking about is really compressed and put into there. So this is a really good starter place to get in and get your mind working and to see what these concepts are about and how to start to apply them. The other place that I think that is valuable is to go to our website and look at some of the blog articles that I've written. Those are available there as well. They go into some of these other arenas, and that's at www.highconflict.net. So the book, the website are also really good places to get the material. And also we have classes. We have high conflict diversion program classes that you can get into and get some one-on-one help with this as well.
And you know me, I'm aggressive. Whatever I want to become good at or learn, I find someone who's good at it and pay them and hire them and shorten my learning curve. What if somebody just wants your help? Somebody says, Brooke has this information. He's good at something I'm not good at yet, and I want to work with him. Do you have any type of coaching or consultations or anything like that?
Absolutely, I do. I do one-on-one coaching for custody cases. I help people get ready for family court services. If you've got that in your community, I work with attorneys and clients to help them with managing and strategically setting them up to have more successful cases as well.
And how do they reach out? You want them to just go to the website or email or phone, or what's the best way for them to reach out, raise their hand, and say, I need some help?
They can email me. My direct email is brooke@highconflict.net. That's BROOK at highconflict, HIGH, conflict.net.
Perfect. That's everything everybody would need to get some help, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you, Charlie.